Hello, beautiful souls. We're so happy to have you on our podcast today. We are the Unmasked Podcast. So, no longer the unnamed podcast, but the Unmasked Podcast. We finally came up with a name a few episodes ago. So, we'll be revealing all of that wonderful stuff coming up in the near future. So, we're super excited about it. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rachael Woosley, and I have the beautiful Diamond Trip with me and her blue hair. If you can't see it, but she does have blue hair today. So, my unicorn, as I call her. So, welcome, Diamond.
Hi.
So, speaking of unicorns, if you haven't gone back and listened to like the last couple episodes, one on manifestation, and I don't remember what the topic of the second one was,
Caring.
but what was it called?
It's caring and overextending yourself.
Caring and overextending yourself. We kind of delved into a human design aspect. So if it hits hard for you, good. But we talk about unicorns a lot in there because Diamond's daughter loves unicorns. So we talk about it. But I also made a reference many episodes ago that when I was thinking about this podcast and I was meditating and praying about it, I saw Diamond pop up in my head, but I only saw her hair because every time I've been with Diamond, her hair's always been a different color. And I was like, my unicorn, like that's what I thought. It was like the unicorn colors. And I was like, that's Diamond. Like I knew it was her. And when she accepted to do this with me, I was completely elated because we're having a blast doing these episodes. So there we go. So we're going to talk about not some of my favorite topics. I'm going to tell you that with this one, but no, they're good topics, but they're going to be heavy, but they're going to be good. So in the last episode, we kind of started hinting at the end, talking about judgment, expectations. Was there something else there was another word I thought?
Yeah, no, there wasn't another word. So one of the things that came up when we started talking about judgments and expectations, I thought about the fact that psilocybin has helped me with some of these things and releasing some of that. So I had just suggested that we also incorporate how plant medicine has possibly helped us with some of these things.
That is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I know it's diamonds too. So yeah, we'll get to it. So judgment and expectations. Oh, Lordy, where do we start unpacking this?
Well, okay. So one of the things that like queued it up was us talking about like as these caring, nurturing beings that we are, because of conditioning, we oftentimes live in the shadows of these gifts. And so we overextend ourselves. We have like, personal boundaries that like don't exist really, because we're always we're always trying to be there for the other person. So we had talked about like responsibility and can we give the responsibility back to the owner? We had talked about like what role does guilt play in this whole thing? And can we let go of that guilt? And so we ended on the question of, are there places where I need to soften my judgments of other people's values? And so I think even starting with our values, right? Because in order for us to have judgment or expectations about other people's values, like I feel like it would be a natural place to start with like, what do we value? And then like take it from there.
What do I value? Ooh, okay. So one of them one really big thing for me is integrity, like people's integrity. And it doesn't necessarily go to the point of like your word is your word, but your intentionality behind your words often mean a lot too. But people's integrity, because I think that over time we can morph and change. So a lot of the things that I valued with integrity in my 20s, I don't expect that from people now because that's not their value system. So there we go. We're starting to answer the question here. Because my outlook on other people and what I expect from them has changed. So while I value integrity, my definition of integrity is not everybody else's definition of integrity. So how I value it and how I present it to the world is how I do it. But that doesn't mean everybody's going to reciprocate that back in the same way to me. So that value integrity, family is a huge thing for me. And one that wasn't, but now is self-care. that is a humongous value for me, and part of my brand is self-care, because I neglected that for so long, and was not told, or was not made to believe that it was valuable. That self-sacrificing piece that we talked about in the last episode, that was a value I had, was the self-sacrificing. Like, I thought that was going to get me closer to God. Like, that was really what I thought. And no. It was only going to physically get me closer to God, because it almost took my life, not valuing my own self. And that was when it switched, when I realized that I could no longer give from the cup that I was living with, because there was nothing else to give, and it was shattered and broken, and I needed to fix it. And so that value has definitely changed. So those are a few of my values.
I love those. As alluded, I kind of had an opportunity to reflect on my values, and that reflection, I actually changed one of them, because I looked up the definition of it. I was like, I don't necessarily know that this is a value. So the question was like, what are my most important values, and how can they be seen in my everyday decisions and my life's direction? And so first I looked up values because I was like, all right, let me make sure I understand the question
Right.
in its entirety. And then from there, which is funny, judgment is in there. I just saw that. A person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what is important in life. I was like, oh, that's so on the nose for what we're talking about. So the ones that I had come up with were authenticity, honesty / transparency. I wrote down compassion, empathy, and growth / expansion. And so, again, in that same vein of like, let me understand what I'm writing down really. Because I say things like compassion and empathy like all the time. But when I looked up compassion and it started talking about sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings, I was like, oh, I don't want to pity people. I don't
Right.
think that's showing up in everyday life, but empathy, like 1000%. I feel what you are going through, and I empathize. And I remember like I went through this phase with like apologies, and like, as women, we're always conditioned to say I'm sorry about everything. And so in an attempt to shift that narrative for me, I started to say, like, when someone would say like someone had passed or whatever, like, my grandmother has passed, I'd be like, I empathize with you so much, like, especially going through, because it's like they don't want pity, like
Right.
they want you to understand what they're going from and meet them there. So compassion got crossed out for like the everyday, like, yes, it is important as a value, but is it like the most important? I think empathy is more important once I looked up the definition. And so yeah, those are the most important values. And like you were saying, even with the honesty and transparency, I guess as we like shift into that part of the conversation, like a lot of us have the expectation that because we are honest and transparent, that other people will be. And so when someone doesn't meet that standard for us, it's like, we're like, okay, like so we were talking about, I got personal and I was talking about my partner in the last episode. And so the not self question that comes out of having an open or undefined solar plexus is, am I avoiding confrontation and truth?
Mm.
And I have done a lot of work around that in our relationship, because like there were times where even though I have a defined solar plexus, I'm like, I hurt him. So I would like, if we were on a break or something and I would like be talking to other people, like I'd wait. I'd be like, let me really see how this is, where
Mhm.
this is going. Like, let me really, feel things out. And then it would get to the point where it was like the other person was like, I want to take things like to the next level.
Right.
And so then I would have to come to my partner and be like, yeah, so whatever ambiguous whatever we were doing because we were on a break, like all of that's going to have to stop because I now found this new person and I want to be over here, basically. And
Right.
so he, over our relationship, has expressed to me that during those times he feels blindsided
Right.
because even though we're not together, like we're having a good time, we're laughing, we're being a family. And he's like, what? You're trying to be with somebody else? Oh, okay. And so like I got to a point where I was like, okay, well, I don't want him to feel blindsided anymore. So I
Right.
would get to this point where if I like would meet somebody and there was even like a spark, like maybe we would go to a dinner or something, like I at that point would be like, hey, I met this person. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I thought I would give you a heads up because I don't want you to feel blindsided
Right.
because I value honesty and transparency.
Right.
He would have several things in his life where I would be blindsided even after being like transparent and open. And I'm like, what the hell? Like,
Right.
but having to like shed that. And then, you know, obviously, God, I wish I had human design throughout some parts of our relationship so I could know these things about um
I
like
said the same thing when I uncovered like soul contracts. I'm like, especially starting as a parent, I'm like, if I would have understood my kid like this, holy cow, life would have been so, or if I would have understood myself, like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing. And I found it funny because when you were talking, I thought of a scenario that the old me, let's say like pre-aware Rachel, when you were talking, I would have already in my mind made a judgment of you because the standards at which I was taught early on of what a partnership was or a family unit was not what you described. But knowing you, knowing your human design, knowing your soul contract, it makes perfect sense. Like what you're experiencing and the growth you're going through, because that's what you're here to learn, in essence, really, And so, like, when you have a different perspective like that, I can sit there and at first I thought, this is funny because this would have been such a judgment like 20 years ago. But now I look at it, I'm like, this is her journey. So I want our listeners to hear that because oftentimes that's where judgment and expectations get skewed because we think everybody else is living to the lifestyle or the contract or the human design that we have, and it is not their journey. So it's not going to look the same. So like my idea even now of like what a family unit is totally different than what it was 10 or 15 years ago. And I would have fought you tooth or nail and thrown every scripture known to man that is even in scripture or not in scripture that's made up, which most of them are made up, at you to tell you how wrong you were. But your journey is what your soul needed to be able to accomplish what it's doing. So I hope our listeners are listening to that because I want our listeners to get to that point. And we're all on that journey of getting to that point. So that was a great, not that it's a great story, but with the situation, because I know like that's tough. Like when you're like, I've got to navigate this from a different perspective because I am hurting somebody and they're hurting me. And what do we do? Because you guys have a child. So like you're going to navigate life regardless together for the rest of her life, and your life. So you got to navigate it. And I find that even though it's not fun for you, I find that beautiful because you are asking the right questions, in my opinion, to help yourself grow and help your soul grow. So kudos to you for that.
you.
I don't know.
Thank you, Awakened Rachel. I said, thank you, Awakened Rachel.
Yeah. Well, because I know what I was like when I was your age. So like, I could be Diamond's mother, like age-wise. Young mother, but I could be her mother. But that's one of those things, like I still consciously think, and like our last episode, we talked a little bit about guilt. I sometimes will go, man, my 25-year-old self was not a very kind, gentle, loving person, even though I thought I was. My 30-year-old self was really not a loving, kind, gentle person, but I thought I was. Now, some people may not think I'm kind and loving now, and I think I am, but I'm not there yet. Like, I don't think I've completely come to, because I still have judgments and I still have expectations on people, which I wish I didn't, but I do.
I know. That's, oh my gosh. So in Gene Keys, like in the spheres, one of my spheres is releasing the shadow of expectation, embracing the gift of detachment. And at its highest vibration, the city is celebration.
Mm-hmm.
And it is hard, like judgments and expectations, like judgments in the way that you're raised, the way the things that you believe, they form these expectations because we're like perfect example. So you talk about family being like one of your values. So I know we talked about this, I think it was like episode 1 or 2 where we're talking about growing up. Like I was removed from my mom's care due to child abuse and neglect. And I was placed into the system where I had to fend for myself.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, I found my dad, like they found my dad. I went to live with him. Things didn't work out. Again, I was by myself. Even with my aunt, we bought a house together. And a year after, like, because she had expectations, I guess I did too. I'll take, responsibility in that, but we didn't voice anything. So we went into it. And when things didn't pan out how she wanted it to, she was like, I'm moving out. And I'm like, what do you mean? We have a mortgage. Like, what are you talking about? We're, and we ended up selling the house like a year after we bought it. And thankfully we bought it, it was like I think it was a foreclosed house. And so when we had it like reevaluated or whatever, there was enough market value that like it wasn't a complete loss, but we lost some money. And I, every now and then, but like we have these, and so like that narrative, that journey for me, like he has grown up in the same house, his parents are married, they've been married, like it's been like this whole thing. And especially with him having a foreigners profile, like his close intimate networks mean a lot to him. When he lets somebody in, like they're there, like he is trusting them. And so like when things get tough, he turns to family. He's like, these are the people who have my back. And I'm like, if things get tough, family don't mean anything apparently, because I was on my own. Like, and so you have these like different expectations of when things get tough, and it shows up like it creates these conflicts. And so to release that and to detach from those expectations and to embrace that there are other ways of thinking. And that's why I wanted to bring in, it's funny because I didn't even think about the fact that our modalities help with this, because I was just like, I was like plant medicine, like because of like the way psilocybin, it lowers your default mode network. So, and it creates new neural pathways. I'm like, I'm just more of an understanding person when I microdose or when I, deal with psilocybin. But I totally didn't even think about the fact that our modalities help with this too.
Well, and I think for our listeners, like, because when you brought that piece up earlier, when we were talking about this episode, I was like, well, yeah, like I just wrote a book chapter and it literally was talking about the steps that I took, like getting help, from a coach, and then learning the modalities, but then also plant medicine. And I think that what in society, unfortunately, and I'm going to speak to my past life because I was in the medical field. We're going to leave it at that. This is not medical advice, so please don't take it as that. I have to put that disclaimer somewhere, I'm sure. But we want an instant fix, and we want things to just like, we want our depression to be gone. We want this to be gone. We want that to be gone. Sometimes we want, people around us to be gone, like whatever it is, like we just want it instantaneously taken care of. And we think healing in some ways is the same way. It's not. It's a lifelong process. So if you don't want to do it lifelong, don't start, because once you peel back one layer, it's another layer and another layer and another layer. And then the layer that you've already taken care of will come back to haunt you. And like, it's this ongoing process. And I'm not trying to discourage people, but there is a combination, I think, of tools and modalities. And that's one of the things with this podcast that we want to share. And both of us are huge plant medicine advocates. I'm more on the cannabis side of plant medicine, getting into the mushrooms, which I think is completely funny. You have that on your thing because I was doing some research on that this morning. We'll talk about mushrooms maybe in a later episode, but we'll definitely talk about cannabis. And so we've talked about psilocybin before. I said it correctly. Whew, I got that one out correctly because I read it the other day in a post you did, and I was still said it wrong, but I said it right that time. But for me, like how plant medicine came in with the modalities and with coaching and making the decision to choose myself, because that was the fourth piece, was the self-care piece, was the fact that you were talking about like the neural pathways. So with cannabis, and especially on the CBD side of it, it's taking your nervous system and taking the edge off of your nervous system is really what it's doing. It's healing the nervous system, it's healing the cannabinoid system. And because all of us have a damaged one, all of us have a cannabinoid system, every mammal does. And we're all nutritionally deficient in it, just put it that way. And so when it's like vitamin K or vitamin D or vitamin C, when you're deficient in it, what does the doctor do? They tell you to take the supplement. Well, we don't talk about the cannabinoid system, and so we don't supplement for that. But when you're off the edge, and that's what I always tell people, like for a lot of women especially, we stand on the edge, we stand on a cusp all the time, just by being women, because we're the, oftentimes the caretakers, we're the working person, but then we're also the mom at home, we're the caretaker, we wear all of these hats. And so a lot of us are standing on cliffs, and just a little thing will push us right over. And that's when we blow up and we get pissed and we get mad, and rage will come out, and addictions pop up and depression pops up. Like those are the things that are on the other side if we don't know how to take care of ourselves before we get to that place. And for me, when I was going through this process, plant medicine was like my saving grace to stay off that edge while I was making those decisions, setting those boundaries, unlocking those new pieces to who I was. And now, like, even today, I had a bad day. I've had a bad day so far, just physically. And I had increased my dosages because I have things that I need to get done. Like I had this podcast to do. I've got kids to homeschool. I've got a business to run. Like there's these things in motion, and I need to stay off the edge. Because if I don't take care of myself, like when you take, the psilocybin, like when you microdose, you're taking care of yourself. And I look at it as it's a tool in my tool belt that I will use it anytime I need to use it. And I will advocate for anybody else to use it whenever they need to use it. Because for many of us, it's the deficiencies that we're not taking care of in the physical body. Because even though we're spiritual beings, we got to live in this world. Like we got to be tethered to this planet. And so let's enjoy it while we're here, in my opinion. And so that helps me enjoy life and not be, the raging, angry person that I probably could be, and it goes back to like that 25-year-old me. I wished I would have had CBD and cannabis back then. I wish I would have been in a place that I understood that, because I would have been a better person. Even in the environment that I was in, I would have been a better human for other humans. And that makes me sad that I couldn't be that because I was so ill-informed. And so for me, like the plant part of it is one of my passions, because the more we know, the more we all can enjoy this planet together better, in my opinion. So there's my take.
No, you're fine.
I could talk about plant medicine all day long. I could, because I will say this, and I wrote it in a book too that's being published. Plant medicine saved my life. I was on 13 different medications for about 9 months. 13, yes, listeners, 13, 1-3. Like Friday the 13th, it was living hell every day to function. I had uppers, downers, everything in betweeners to function every day. I have taken nothing for 6 years other than cannabis. Don't eat anything. So it saved my life because I would really be up a creek if I was still on all that medication. I don't know that I would be up functioning. I really wouldn't, because I wasn't functioning back then. I was just surviving,
Yeah.
literally. So that's my take on plant medicine, because I think the tools, that is the tool. That is part of my toolbox and will forever be part of my toolbox. And I, with my clients, I advocate for it all the time. So
I couldn't agree more. Like when I think about, I've used cannabis before, but it's mostly been to help me sleep.
mhm.
Because of the depression from my diagnosis. So it was more for me, like I feel like it was more because I didn't know, because I wasn't informed. It was more like the fix of the symptom, not the actual root cause.
Right.
And so when I had the trial, which is crazy, I just celebrated my 2-year anniversary from my clinical trial, which is like, oh my gosh, yay. But when I think about, like, I wasn't on 13 at once. But I'm pretty sure I've tried at least 13, because that's one of the criteria for getting your medical marijuana card, is like, what have you tried in the past that hasn't worked?
Right.
And do you think cannabis can help? And so, like, similar to you, although I gave up being on like SSRIs and antidepressants like before the trial. So I would say probably 3 years at least since I haven't had to take any sort of antidepressant or any man-made
Right. Synthetic.
synthetic, right? Because when I realized that, like, essentially all the medicines are trying to do is like mimic what is already here. The problem is that, like, what's already here, if you really take it, like, there are some people, I microdose because of a very numerous different reasons, but I know that I'm a better person, that I'm more open, that I am more expansive, that critical inner critic part of me that's always nitpicking, that has taken on voices from, you name it, society, my mom, like all of that, like, it gets quieter when I microdose. And so, like, but there are people from that trial who have had just the one hero dose experience,
Mm-hmm.
and they are living well after
Yeah.
just that one dose. And so then it becomes, well, how do you monetize it? And they can't.
Right.
They can't do it. So
Right.
they're like, but we have these pills. Like when I watched like Painkiller on Netflix, that series, I was like, wow, this was what, like, I knew that oxycodone and all of the things were bad, but I didn't know that they were like literally the marketing gimmicks of, like, because I was, when it came out, right, I was like, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
need oxy for anything. So like I wasn't subscribed to the marketing of oxy. But hearing about these other people who were like getting hooked and who were
Yeah.
like having it forced down, like it was like, oh man, this is wild.
Right. And I think it's interesting that you said that, because when I started actually taking CBD, I was looking at medical marijuana, but because of the stigma of how I grew up and the people around me, I didn't even like, I talked to other people that were not related to me about medical marijuana, but to even broach that topic with my family, because when I was in the medical field, one of the things I did is I worked in substance abuse and I worked in clinical trials with heavy drugs like narcotics. And my husband did too, in more of the social services aspect. So we saw the good, the bad, the ugly of all of that. And I was like, yeah, I don't know that I want to go down that route. And that was still my uh, I wasn't learned, I hadn't learned about it enough to understand that it was completely different. But when I was looking into it, I only was doing it for pain. I wasn't really even thinking about the medications that I was on or the other diagnoses or the sleep, the 2 sleeping pills I was on, the anti-anxiety medicines that I was on, the SSIs that I was on. I can't even tell you what I was on at this point. It was just astronomical because every time I went to a doctor, they gave me a new prescription for something. And so I started taking it for pain because I had old athletic injuries. I was getting older. I was like, I'm getting probably going to get arthritis and all this, crap. And so I took it for a symptom, but it helped with my sleep, for me anyways, more than it helped with anything, because it had taken, like I said earlier, it took me off the edge of my nervous system, and my endocannabinoid system was actually getting nourished. I didn't feel antsy all the time. I didn't feel anxious all the time. I didn't have the leg tremors. I didn't wake up with like startling myself awake. All of those things like started like declining. And I was like, wait a second, I'm still on the medication, but it's declining and I don't need this high a dose. And that was what was so eye-opening to me, because after I'd been in the medical field, I was used to everybody being on pills. Like I was like, I know how pills worked. I knew the efficacy. I knew it all. But I was like, wait a second, something's different. And even when I go and ask the doctor, well, I don't need this as much as I needed it before. And that was the first thing I got off, was the pain medication, because I was on some pretty damn strong pain medications because they let me be on them, because I asked for them, because I wanted them, because I didn't want to hurt anymore. But I also didn't want to feel anymore. I was at that place in life where I just wanted to be numb. I didn't care how it happened. I just wanted to be numb. And plants slowed everything down in my head and gave me clarity so that I could actually function correctly. And I hadn't done that. And it was crazy to me when I woke, like when I started waking up, like I had gone for like a decade like that. And no one knew, not even my husband knew. Like I was faking it that much. I was masking it. And I was, I was good at it. I was infamous for it. Nobody knew it. I mean, and when I had my little break and I was institutionalized, like if it would have been announced, it would have floored half the people around me. They would have never believed it because they thought I had my shit together. And I was a walking disaster. Walking disaster. But plants changed it all for me. Like I still to this day, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can actually have clarity of thought. And I didn't know what that was like in my 20s and 30s. I was so just running till I was burning both ends. Like I was a candle burning both ends. And I ran like that for almost 20 years. I don't do that anymore. Like when I don't, like now I'm at the point where if I don't want to do it, I don't do it. I don't have to do it. I don't have to have you like me. I don't have to appease you. I have to just enjoy my life and live it that way. And now I think that's what plant medicine for me is giving me that freedom to be who I am. Like understand who I truly am.
I love that. And I love that we already kind of started talking about modalities in here as well, because like I get certain aspects of that with psilocybin, but there is still this part of me, like it's in my design, it's in my makeup. Actually, now that I'm saying this, I'm pretty sure like 27
moments that Diamond has. She's like, oh, I love it.
Because no, it's so genuine, because actually I'm pretty sure that so in human design, you have the north node and then you have the south node. Okay, so it's in my south. Okay, that'll be interesting. I was like, I knew 27 was somewhere in there, and that's what we were literally just talking about like the last time. So, I'm the one in me is like, well, okay, so what's 28? Because apparently around like you were saying, like 35, that's when we make this kind of like transition into like the North Node is kind of like the immature part, like what we're, you know, living through or whatever. And then the South Node is kind of like what we are stepping into in this next phase with like new wisdom and things like that. So I find it really interesting that 27 is actually in my South Node, because I'm like, we just talked about caring and things. So I'm excited for that wisdom. However, what I will say is, plant medicine helps me get there, but there are still certain parts of me that, you know, because I just turned 29, like I just it was funny. One of my mentors, she was talking, she was like, yeah, you just went through whatever, because our charts are so similar that because she just turned 51. Our birthdays are like a few days apart from each other. She's like, yeah, you just blah, 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 blah. You just entered it. And she was like, wait, how old are you again? She's like, oh, you're 29. She was like, basically, she was like, you're not there yet. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay.
That's the thing in soul design. The soul goes through 7-year cycles. I mean, obviously that's God's number, but you know, the universe's number, that you go through it every 7 years. What we're finding though, which I think is very interesting, and I think this is kind of where you're at, and it'll be interesting to see with like your human design in the nodes and stuff, is we're seeing people younger than 35 awakening quicker. And so they're experiencing some of these things, but they still don't have the 3D earth experiences to really grasp all of that. They don't have enough life experience. And I hate saying it that way, but they don't have enough life experience to go, hey, yeah, I saw that at 29. So like now I can go back and I can see time periods, and year almost indefinitely. Like next year I'll be coming up on another 7-year cycle. So like I'm kind of not in the awakening phase anymore. I'm more in the preparation phase for the learning phase in a way. Like I'm still learning the modalities, I'm still learning the things, and you know, but we see a lot of younger people awakening quicker, and so they're experiencing that dichotomy, like they're there, but they're not quite there yet. And so it's going to be interesting, like in the next, you know, I think in the next 20 years with some of these modalities that we're using, because you guys are awakening to, like, you're given these modalities. Like I said this to somebody the other day, if my parents, okay, so which would be boomers, you know, like legit boomers, you know, like over like the 60 to 70-year-old boom, well, it'd be 65 and older, like the legit boomers. Gen X is not boomers, people. Like, let's just put that clear. If they had these tools, a lot of us wouldn't be going through the things we're going through. But it was not the right time for the planet to have these tools. And so we're in such a unique space that there's a lot of people in my age demographic that they're slowly coming to these tools, but they're so entrenched in what they know that it's hard for them to change course. But those of you that are younger, like Diamond's age, you're getting these tools and you're going, oh my gosh, if I can see this in my relationships, if I can see this in when I have children, like how is this dynamic going to work? You're given a bigger toolbox than, you know, giving the doctor handing you a child and say, here, have fun. You know, that was what I was given. You know, the first one, it was like, here, have fun with it, you know, and you're like, what the hell do I do? The second one I had in my mid-30s, I was starting to waken up, and, you know, he's my, you know, laissez-faire child that is the whimsical one, the creative one, you know, the one that I wish I could have had a childhood like that, you know, because he's so free. And then my last one, he's so easy because I'm like, I get him because I had these tools. And so I'm so glad that we're like talking about these tools and plants, because, you know, cannabis was taken off, you know, out of everything for the longest time. And now it's coming back, and we're having studies like with psilocybin and, you know, shrooms and all these other things that are coming to light. And they've been used medicinally or tribally or culturally for thousands and thousands of years. And now we're understanding the importance of them and how to bring those into our everyday lives so that we are better humans. Because why not? and that goes back to our topic, which we really kind of got off topic with the judgment part of it with the plants. But I know for me, in my process, how all of these tools have helped me is I can now step back and go, you know what? That person's living their own journey. It may not be my journey. It may not be things that I may not make that decision, but they did. And I'm going to honor them for that. I'm going to honor them for their journey. And this goes even for your parents. Oh, Lordy. I'm being told to say something that's not going to go across really well.
Oh my gosh, say it. The guides are speaking through you. Do it.
Yes, probably. If you're on the screen, you can tell, like, I get these inklings. Be kind to your parents. Because they screwed up. All parents screw up. But they didn't have these tools, especially if you're my generation. And I'm really speaking to my generation. Your parents had no tools. They had no tools to help them with anything on how to raise children. And so they pretty much raised, as they say, a feral generation of people. And we've kind of raised another generation of feral children. And we have to honor everybody's journey, because we now are starting to have tools to help us with that. So journeys are going to be different. And some people, like, in case with like my mom, there are certain things I wish my mom would understand like I do, but she's never going to. And I have to honor her for that. I have to honor her in her journey. And I have to say, okay, like, this is a boundary for me and her. And I've done that. When she steps over that, I have to have grace with her, because it's my boundary. It's not hers. So I can't expect her to always honor the boundary that I've set. I just have to remind her lovingly, hey, Mom, we're not doing this anymore. We're not going down. And I always blame my mom for stuff, but I love my mom dearly. But I know she's on her path and I'm on my path, and I have to honor that, even though I don't like it. Yeah. And when we give that respect, it's like earlier talking about your relationship with your partner. I honor your relationship. I honor the journey you're on, because you're growing in it. So why would I judge it? Why would I care as long as you're growing? If there's some reason you're not growing, or there's some reason that, you need to remove yourself, like physically, for physical reasons or emotional reasons, or, whatever, then I would say, okay, if that's what you need to do, then do it. Like, I would honor you for that. And I think that's where the judgment and expectation piece is, that we have to, in our culture, in our society, and as humans, we're souls first, humans second. And we have to honor that.
I love that. Yeah, I think you said it beautifully, especially with some of the modalities that I'm stepping into now. Like, we are 100% a soul first, which is why things like sexuality and stuff, like, your soul is your soul. Like, your body, yes, you, like, even with things like transgender, like, context and things like that, like, you are a soul. You were given, you chose this body, or you were given this body, but, like, at the end of the day, you're a soul. And there are some people who are like, I think it's pansexual, where it's just like love, like their motto is literally like, love is love. Like, you can be, whatever, and I'm gonna love you, because if I feel that connection, then that's where we are. And so I think that you said it beautifully, to help, like, round us out, that we're a soul first, human second. And I love that the guides were tapping you with that message, because that was something, like, when my mom finally gave me her time of birth and I was able to look at her chart, like, even something as simple as, like, understanding that, like, in her gene keys it says she thrives best as an entrepreneur. My whole, and on top of that, she's a manifesting generator, so she's meant to be multi-talented. But she grew up in a generation, especially with my grandparents, who were like, you do one thing and stick to it, like, especially with like her.
God.
Yeah,
Can you imagine, like, listeners, can you imagine, like, because some of you will be boomers, but they were so restricted on the shit that they could do. Like they're so ingrained on the 9 to 5, do the job, be the secretary, be the nurse, be this, be that, and to undo that at their ages, that's a huge, huge shift of everything. And for some of them, they can't shift. They're not meant to shift. They're not meant to. They're meant to for us to look at and go, that's not the way we want to do things. How do we do it better? And we need those people not to shift, sadly, so that some of us can shift greater. I know that's going to be a hard concept for people to get.
Yeah, but it's one that's needed. I love that you brought that up.
So if people aren't shifting around you, there may be a reason why they're not shifting, and it may be for your greater good. So be gracious with them. Be gracious with them because they're there for a reason. And that concept for me, when I realized people were souls first and humans second, was the biggest shift in changing judgment and expectations and understanding who people are. And I want to close out with this. If you have something else to say, go ahead. But in both of our modalities, we can take a look at people within your family units. I know, and Diamond can speak to how she does this. I always ask for you to get permission from that individual because Source won't always tell you what you need to know unless you have their permission. But for me, like when I was able to look at my parents' contracts in relationship to mine, or my husband's contract and my children's contract in relationship to mine and into theirs. So with contracts, it's all on your birth name. So it's whatever is on that birth certificate. And there's a reason for that because that's what the soul chose initially. So if there's some changes throughout it, we'll deal with that on an individual basis. But when you are born, your soul has decided certain things. And so when you bring other people into that mix of it, oftentimes they will have things to either help you become better or they're there to help you be refined. And that ain't always pretty. And sometimes they're your siblings or your children or your spouse. And once you understand their role for you, makes life a lot easier. And when you understand your role for them, it's very eye-opening. And I know human design does a very similar thing where you can take a look at, your partners or your children's human design.
Yeah.
And when you see that and you can go, okay, like I have a child who is here to nothing but push my buttons to make me a better human and to make me a better parent and to make me a better mom. But every day I have to remind myself when he pushes my buttons and he wants to make me mad, I'm like, okay, dear child, I know you're here to help me. And I constantly say that to myself because if I didn't, I would lash out at him and be very, very hurtful at times. But I know that that's his purpose in his relationship with me. And it's not always that way, but at times it can be. And I honor him for that. I don't like it, but I honor him for it. It is what it is, but I didn't understand that before I saw the contracts together. I didn't understand that. So, if you're a parent who's struggling with the kiddo and you want to find that out, let me help you with that because it makes a world of difference when you're parenting. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I second that. And if you're in a situation where like the person has like passed on and you can't get consent, because like I know with my most recent modality, the Akashic Records, like you need to get like specific information from the person. And I actually, because the program requires me to have practice clients, and one of the people I asked, I basically asked for the information and she was asking a bunch of questions, and then I gave her the clarity and she was like, no, I'm okay. Like, and I thought she was like a sure, like, let's do this. But there are ones where you need that consent, but there are like human design, because it just requires like the birth time and the date. Like, of course, in theory, it's ideal if you get the other person's consent, because if they are still living, you're probably going to bring up stuff that's like, they're like, how do you know that, or whatever.
Right.
But like even with my mom, like I really want to look at my granddad's chart. I want to look at my grandmother's chart. They are no longer here, but I want to see how their conditioning helped formed her conditioning and things like that. So look into the modality. You can visit both of our websites to see what all is required on what consent or time or what
the
have you.
reason I say consent is because most people don't know what their parents' birth certificate says. So they have to go ask. So it's just best to be honest and say, hey, I'm getting this done. And it's to help me so that I know how to be in relationship with you better. Most parents will tell you that, but like we need it to be specific because it's based on phonetics. So like invariably 8 out of 10 people will come to me and say, hey, this is what my name is. I'll ask them, please go look at your birth certificate and give me the correct spelling. And they'll come back and go, you know what? I didn't even know my middle name was spelled like that. Because they'll be told that it's one thing and they find out it's another. So and if it's wrong on the birth certificate, that's what the soul wanted. It wanted it to be wrong because it needed that phonetics. So that's why I always say like consent, because I will ask people for them to look at their birth certificates and check it twice. Because if we do it wrong, then it won't make sense. Like the frequencies won't resonate with you. And that gets frustrating. So, because like I have a middle name that's Lee, but it's spelled Lea. But if I told you my name is Rachael Lee, you would write it like Lee. And that would be a completely different phonetic sounding. So that's the reason I ask for consent. It's just to check that birth certificate. But yeah, the soul, then that gives the soul permission to speak how it wants to speak. So yeah, so check out the modalities. Make sure to like and share and hit whatever button or subscription or whatever is on the social media platform that you're listening to us on. And make sure that you get notifications when our next episode drops. And we will see you on the next episode. So we're super excited to just be sharing our journey that's real and raw with you and completely unmasked. So there we go.
I love it. Until next time.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.